In 1653, England had no king. The monarchy had been abolished. Power rested in the hands of one man. He was no prince or duke. He was a middling country gentleman from a remote corner of England, a father of 9, a devout Puritan, and a natural-born military genius who led a revolution and beheaded a king. His name was Oliver Cromwell. To some, he was a towering hero, an English Moses who freed the nation from a tyrant's yoke, a defender of Protestant faith and parliamentary liberty. To others, he was a bloodthirsty dictator, a usurper who replaced a king with an even more oppressive military regime, a religious zealot who desecrated churches and banned Christmas. So who was he? A savior or a monster? A revolutionary or a tyrant? The answer is more complex than you might think. This is the story of how an ordinary man rose to wield absolute power and the cost of that revolution. For the first 40 years of his life, nothing suggested Oliver Cromwell would become a historical giant. Born in 1599 to a minor gentry family, he attended Cambridge, but left after his father's death to manage the family farm. In those years, he was unremarkable, a husband, a father, a farmer. But in the 1630s, he underwent a profound spiritual crisis and emerged a fervent Puritan. He believed God had a special plan for him and for England. His career began modestly. In 1640, he was elected to Parliament for Cambridge. He was a little-known figure, an awkward but passionate speaker, often raging against the injustices he attributed to King Charles VI. No one could have predicted this man would soon become the nation's commander and ruler. When the English Civil War broke out in 1642, Cromwell had no military experience. But he had two things more important: an unshakable belief he was fighting for God, and a natural talent for organization and leadership. He returned to his hometown and raised a cavalry unit from farmers and devout Puritans like himself. This force, known as the Ironsides, became legendary for its iron discipline and fanatical courage. They sang psalms as they rode into battle. They believed God was on their side. Cromwell's talent was quickly recognized. He was a key architect of Parliament's new model army, a professional force, promoted on merit rather than noble birth. This army crushed the Royalists at decisive battles like Marston Moor and Naseby. From a country gentleman, Cromwell became England's most formidable general. After King Charles V was defeated and captured, Parliament tried to negotiate with him. But Cromwell and the army lost patience. They believed Charles was a man of blood, a tyrant who could not be trusted and would always seek to restart the war. Cromwell, initially hesitant, was ultimately swayed by deep religious conviction. God had judged the king on the battlefield. Executing Charles was not just a political necessity, it was fulfilling God's will. He was one of the strongest voices pushing for the king's trial, and one of the 59 who signed one of the most famous death warrants in history. He is said to have told the other signatories, "We will cut off his head with the crown upon it." This act made Cromwell a man with no turning back. He had killed a king in the name of the people. Now he had to build something to replace it. England became a republic, or commonwealth, but threats remained. Ireland, largely Catholic and Royalist, had rebelled. In 1649, Cromwell led his army to Ireland. His campaign there became the darkest and most controversial chapter of his career. At the towns of Drogheda and Wexford, Cromwell's forces committed brutal massacres, killing thousands of soldiers and civilians alike. To Cromwell, this was God's righteous punishment for Catholic heretics who had massacred Protestants earlier. But to the Irish, it was an unforgivable war crime, and Cromwell's name became cursed for generations. Cromwell's conquest cost Ireland a quarter of its population and led to widespread Catholic land confiscations. It left a bitter legacy of hatred that lasted centuries. Cromwell had secured the Republic by the sword, but now he faced a tougher enemy, the very politicians he had fought to defend. If you want to know how this revolutionary hero meant to turn against Parliament and seize power himself, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This is the moment the savior began to look like a tyrant. Back in England, Cromwell grew increasingly frustrated with Parliament. He saw its members as corrupt, self-serving, and incapable of building the godly nation he envisioned. In April 1653, his patience snapped. In an act that would define his legacy, he led a group of soldiers into Parliament. Pointing at the members, he shouted, "You have sat too long here for any good you have been doing. Depart, I say, and let us have done with you. In the name of God, go." Then pointing at the mace, the symbol of parliamentary authority, he sneered, "What be this bauble? Take it away." He dissolved Parliament by force. The man who had fought against royal tyranny now acted like a military dictator. After dissolving Parliament, Cromwell was appointed Lord Protector. In essence, he was a king without a crown, wielding more power than Charles Thurston ever had. The Protectorate was a time of contradictions. On one hand, Cromwell pursued a strong foreign policy, rebuilt the navy, and earned international respect. He also allowed some religious tolerance for Protestant sects. On the other hand, he imposed a strict Puritan regime on the country. He divided England into military districts, each ruled by a major general. Theaters were closed, sports were banned on Sundays, taverns were tightly controlled, and most famously, Christmas celebrations were deemed a Catholic ritual and banned. To many English people, this was a dictatorship more oppressive than Charles's reign. The savior had become the oppressor. In 1657, Parliament offered Cromwell what seemed the solution to all problems: the crown. They wanted him to become King Oliver I. This would restore a familiar form of government and ensure stable succession. Cromwell wrestled with the decision for weeks. Becoming king would be the ultimate betrayal of the Republican ideals he had fought for, but it could also bring stability. In the end, after much prayer and reflection, he refused. He said God had judged against monarchy, but perhaps he also knew the army, his old comrades, would never accept him as king. He would continue to rule as Lord Protector. Cromwell died on September 3, 1658, the anniversary of his greatest victories from malaria. He named his son Richard as his successor. But Richard Cromwell lacked his father's talent, charisma, or army support. The Protectorate quickly collapsed. Just 2 years later, in 1660, England, weary of military and Puritan rule, invited the executed king's son, Charles II, back from exile to restore the monarchy. The revolution was over. Things seemed to revert to how they were. But retribution for Cromwell was not done. In 1661, Cromwell's body, along with other revolutionary leaders, was exhumed from its resting place in Westminster Abbey. His corpse was hanged at Tyburn, then beheaded. His head was impaled on a pike outside Westminster Hall for 25 years, a gruesome warning to future traitors. So who was Oliver Cromwell, a hero or a tyrant? Perhaps both. He was a man of iron conviction who stood against tyranny and fought for what he believed was true liberty and faith. He was a military genius who reshaped the English army and made England feared on the world stage. But he was also a man so convinced he was doing God's will that he was willing to trample the law, dissolve Parliament, and impose his vision on an unwilling nation. He became the very thing he fought to destroy, an autocratic ruler. Cromwell's tragedy is that of many revolutionaries. They begin with lofty ideals of liberty, but when they gain power, maintaining it demands control and oppression. His legacy is as complex and divisive as his life. He laid the groundwork for parliamentary supremacy, but also left a cautionary tale about the dangers of military dictatorship and religious extremism. Oliver Cromwell is a towering, contradictory figure in English history, savior turned tyrant forever debated. The fall of the Republic led to a starkly different era, the Restoration. To see how England reacted to 11 years of Puritan rule, you must watch Charles II, the merry monarch who brought decadence back to England. Subscribe to explore the story of a reign of parties, theaters, and royal mistresses, and a king determined never to repeat his father's mistakes.